The studio was silent, brighter than the morning sun, filled with heavy cameras and quiet pressure. Everyone waited for the next take of the emotional climax scene. Sandra Bullock stood in the center, the script memorized in her heart, her eyes ready to deliver one of the most powerful performances of her career. The director nodded once, and the camera began rolling. But halfway through her dialogue, her voice froze. The line she had practiced again and again simply disappeared from her memory. A long pause filled the air. The silence was painful. Crew members shifted nervously, waiting for her to recover. Sandra opened her mouth again, but her words came out broken, and the moment slipped away. The director sighed softly and called, "Cut." The sound echoed through the set like a small earthquake. Sandra blinked, confused and embarrassed. She whispered, "Sorry, I just need a moment." The air around her grew thick. Behind the cameras, people whispered. Some thought she was just tired, others believed she had lost focus. She could feel their judgment like a shadow following her every move. Keanu Reeves, standing nearby, watched quietly. He noticed the tremor in her hand, the way her breathing had changed. He knew that look. It wasn't simple forgetfulness. Something inside her had broken open, but he said nothing yet. He waited, patient and still, his calm energy like a silent shield. The director gave her a break. Sandra walked toward the corner of the set and sat on a wooden crate. She stared at the script in her trembling hands. The words blurred. She wasn't just forgetting a line. She was reliving something painful. The scene they were filming mirrored a memory she had buried years ago. A moment on another film set when she received a call that her mother had passed away. The same lines, the same lighting, the same emotional weight. Her body remembered even when her mind tried to forget. Keanu approached slowly, his steps quiet. He didn't speak. He simply stood near her, offering silent company. Sandra tried to smile, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I can't do this scene," she whispered. "It's too close. It feels like I'm saying goodbye all over again." Keanu's expression softened. "Maybe it's not about saying goodbye," he said gently. "Maybe it's about remembering her voice through yours." His words were simple but carried warmth. He didn't tell her to push through or be strong. He just gave her permission to feel. When the director called everyone back, Sandra nodded. She stood up, still uncertain but with a faint resolve returning. The camera rolled again. Keanu stepped into the scene beside her. Halfway through, when her eyes started to falter, he did something no one expected. He picked up a small candle from the set's table and lit it. The flame flickered softly between them. It wasn't in the script. The light danced on her face and her expression changed. She looked at him unsure. Keanu whispered in character, "Sometimes when we forget the words, we can still speak through silence." The director hesitated but didn't stop the take. The crew froze, sensing something real unfolding before them. Sandra took a deep breath and spoke her next line with trembling clarity. The emotion in her voice was raw, not performed. Every person watching felt it. Even the camera operator's hands shook slightly. Keanu continued the scene naturally, guiding her with quiet steadiness. His eyes calm, his presence protective but never overpowering. The scene ended in perfect stillness. The director didn't call cut for several seconds. He was too moved to speak. Finally, when he did, his voice cracked slightly. "That was beautiful," everyone clapped. Sandra blinked through tears. She knew she hadn't acted that moment. She had lived it. Keanu smiled faintly but said nothing. He simply placed the candle in her hand and walked away, leaving her standing under the studio light. The tiny flame still flickering. Later that evening, alone in her dressing room, Sandra looked at the candle again. It was just a prop, a simple object made of wax and glass. Yet somehow it held more meaning than any award she had ever won. She realized that Keanu hadn't helped her as a co-star. He had reached out as a friend who understood silence better than words. Outside the dressing room, she heard a soft knock. When she opened the door, Keanu was there holding 2 cups of tea. "You did great," he said quietly. She smiled for the first time that day. "No," she replied. "We did." They sat together on the floor, sipping tea and watching the candle burn low. Neither spoke much, but the silence between them felt peaceful now. It was a silence built on respect, not fear. And though the world outside buzzed with cameras and headlines, in that quiet corner, kindness had spoken the loudest. The next morning, the studio was busier than ever. People rushed with coffee cups, sound cables, and makeup brushes, pretending everything was normal. But the air carried whispers. Someone had leaked a behind-the-scenes clip from yesterday's shoot, showing the moment Sandra froze on camera. The clip spread online overnight. Millions had already seen it. Some praised her vulnerability, but many mocked her, claiming she was losing her edge. Sandra walked in quietly, wearing her sunglasses even indoors. She didn't check her phone, but she could feel the tension around her. Assistants avoided eye contact. The director tried to stay upbeat, but his tone was forced. Only Keanu greeted her normally, handing her a small paper bag with breakfast. "You forgot to eat yesterday," he said simply. She managed a faint smile and whispered, "Thank you." As they sat waiting for the next scene, Sandra finally looked at her phone. Thousands of comments filled the screen. Some were kind, but many were cruel. Her heart sank. She put the phone face down, trying to steady her breathing. Keanu noticed and said softly, "People will always see half the picture." "Don't let them write your story for you." She looked at him curiously. "How do you do it? How do you stay calm when the world talks about you like they know you?" He thought for a moment, then replied, "By remembering that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is the only way to protect peace." The director called everyone to position. Today's scene was lighter, but Sandra's hands still trembled slightly. When the camera rolled, she gave her best, yet a small part of her mind stayed trapped in that viral video. Every word she spoke felt like a test she had to pass. During a short break, a crew member approached her awkwardly. "Miss Bullock," he said, "I just wanted to say the clip was powerful. People might not understand, but it was real. It reminded me that even strong people break sometimes." His words surprised her. It was the first kindness she had heard all morning. She nodded gratefully and said, "Thank you for saying that." Across the room, Keanu was quietly adjusting a prop light. He didn't draw attention, but everyone noticed his steady presence. He always carried himself the same way, gentle, humble, focused. When someone dropped a tray, he bent down to help clean it without hesitation. He didn't need cameras to be kind. It was simply who he was. Later, as the evening sun poured through the studio windows, the director decided to reshoot the emotional scene from yesterday, hoping to capture a better angle. Sandra hesitated. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Do we really need to do it again?" The director nodded kindly. "Just once more." "I promise," the crew prepared. Keanu walked up beside her again, holding the same candle from yesterday. The wick was burnt and uneven. "Want to try it again?" he asked gently. She smiled nervously. "Only if you hold it this time," the scene began. Her lines came easier now, but halfway through her voice cracked. Instead of stopping, Keanu stepped closer, holding the candle so the light fell between them. "It's all right," he whispered in character. "We're still here." She looked into his eyes and for a second forgot the cameras, the rumors, and the fear. She just spoke from her heart. Every word felt like healing. When the director called cut, the entire set erupted in applause. Some clapped out of relief, others because they had witnessed something real again. After the shoot, Sandra walked outside into the golden evening light. She finally smiled fully. The air felt lighter, as if a weight had lifted. Keanu followed, holding his motorcycle helmet. "Want to get some air?" he asked. She nodded. They rode through quiet streets, the city glowing in sunset colors. As they stopped by a small lake outside the city, Sandra looked at the water and said, "It's strange. One small moment can make the world doubt everything about you." Keanu replied softly, "Or remind them you're human." They stood in silence, watching the ripples move across the surface. She turned to him and asked, "Why did you light that candle yesterday? It wasn't part of the scene." He looked at the reflection of the fading sun and said, "Someone once told me that a single flame can bring a person back when the world feels dark. I wanted to see if it could still do that." She didn't ask who that person was. She just nodded, understanding that his kindness came from somewhere deeper, maybe from a loss of his own. The quiet between them said more than words ever could. That night, as she scrolled through the new comments online, she noticed something had changed. People were now sharing screenshots of Keanu's gesture instead of her mistake. The caption read, "When respect becomes the language of kindness." She smiled, realizing the world was finally seeing what she had felt, the power of one gentle act. The following day began with light rain over the studio lot. The gray sky seemed to reflect Sandra's mixed feelings. She felt calmer now, but something inside her still lingered. She couldn't stop thinking about Keanu's words, about the mysterious person who had once told him that a single flame could bring someone back from darkness. She wondered who that person was and what story lay behind it. The new shoot was scheduled for afternoon, giving her a quiet morning alone in her trailer. She poured coffee, sat by the window, and replayed the clip of the candle moment that had gone viral. The comments were changing now. People were calling it a masterclass in empathy and the moment Hollywood remembered humanity. Yet the one thing she noticed most was how Keanu's expression looked in that moment. Calm but carrying a deep sadness. She closed her phone, lost in thought when someone knocked softly. It was Keanu. He held a worn-out notebook in one hand and a cup of tea in the other. "Morning," he said gently. "You looked like you needed this." She smiled and invited him in. As they sat across from each other, she finally asked, "Keanu, yesterday you said someone taught you about the flame. Who was it?" For a moment, he didn't answer. He looked out the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. Finally, he said, "A friend. Her name was Mia. She was an acting coach we both once knew. She believed that emotions were light trapped inside people, and that true acting was about freeing that light. She used to light a candle before every performance and tell her students, 'If you lose the words, follow the flame.'" Sandra froze. She whispered, "Mia?" Her eyes widened. "You mean Mia Harper?" Keanu nodded slowly. "You knew her?" Tears filled Sandra's eyes. "She was my first mentor. When my mother was sick, Mia helped me through it. She taught me everything about honesty in performance. I lost contact with her years ago." Keanu's voice softened. "She passed away quietly a few years back. I was with her in her last week. She said she didn't want flowers, just a candle lit every time someone found strength in their weakness." Sandra covered her mouth, overwhelmed. "So the candle you lit—" "It wasn't just for the scene. It was for her," he nodded. "She told me once that one day someone would need the same light. And yesterday, I saw that moment happen." They sat in silence for a while, both remembering a woman who had changed their lives without ever seeking fame. It was a shared memory neither of them knew they had. After a few minutes, Sandra wiped her tears and smiled faintly. "She would have loved what you did." Keanu smiled too. "She would have loved that you kept going." The afternoon shoot began with renewed energy. Everyone felt a strange calm on set, as if something invisible was guiding them. The scene they filmed that day wasn't planned. It was rewritten by the director after seeing their viral moment. He wanted to capture that same authenticity again. During the scene, Sandra had to deliver a line about forgiveness and letting go of fear. As she spoke, the lights flickered slightly, and for a split second, she felt as if Mia was there, watching. Her voice didn't shake this time. It was strong, gentle, and filled with life. The director whispered, "Cut," but nobody moved. The silence was holy. Later, as everyone packed up, Sandra found the old candle sitting on a prop table. Someone had replaced its wick and cleaned the glass. Taped to it was a note that read, "Every light finds its purpose." She looked around for Keanu, but he had already left. That evening, as she stepped out of the studio, rain had stopped. The city lights reflected off puddles like tiny flames. She felt peaceful. Then her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. It read, "Check tonight's charity stream." Curious, she opened the link. It was a live broadcast from a foundation for struggling artists. The host was holding an auction. On the screen was the same candle from their scene. The announcer said, "This flame represents resilience. It will fund new scholarships in memory of Mia Harper, a mentor whose light continues through her students." Her hand trembled as she realized who had donated it. Keanu's name wasn't mentioned anywhere. The donor's tag simply said, "A student who still follows the flame." Sandra smiled through tears. She whispered softly to the screen, You always keep your kindness hidden. As the auction ended, the candle sold for a huge amount. The host announced that all proceeds would help young artists who couldn't afford training. The chat flooded with hearts and messages saying, "Kindness burns brighter than fame." Back in her quiet trailer, Sandra lit a new candle beside her mirror and whispered, "Thank you, Mia. Thank you, Keanu." The flame danced gently, like it understood. What neither of them knew yet was that the simple act of lighting that candle would start something much larger, a movement of kindness that would soon reach millions across the world. The next morning began with quiet excitement. Everyone at the studio was talking about the charity auction. Reporters were calling it the candle that healed Hollywood. Yet no one knew who had donated it. Sandra smiled privately, knowing the truth, but she said nothing. She wanted to protect the purity of Keanu's gesture. When Keanu arrived on set, he acted as if nothing unusual had happened. He wore his usual black jacket and greeted everyone kindly. Sandra walked up to him with a small smile and said, "You started something yesterday?" He looked confused. "What do you mean?" She handed him her phone, showing him articles about the auction's success. "People are calling it the flame of respect," she said softly. "You could have taken credit." "Why didn't you?" He looked at her calmly. "Because real kindness doesn't need an audience. It only needs meaning." His words stayed in her heart for the rest of the day. During filming, she noticed how differently people behaved now. The crew seemed more gentle. The makeup artist asked if she was okay before retouching her face. The sound technician smiled when she thanked him. Even the director, once impatient, started using softer tones. It was as if one quiet act had reminded everyone what respect truly meant. After the shoot, the studio announced a surprise break for the weekend. Sandra decided to spend the day alone at a small cafe near the sea. As she sat with her coffee, she overheard a group of film students at the next table discussing the viral candle. "Did you see how he didn't say a word?" one of them said. "He just helped her without showing off." "That's rare," another replied. "Yeah, and she came back stronger because of that. That's what real teamwork looks like." Sandra smiled quietly. She wanted to tell them she was the woman in that scene, but she stopped herself. Instead, she whispered under her breath, "Thank you, Keanu. You helped me find my calm again." Later that evening, she received a call from the director. His voice was full of excitement. "Sandra, something amazing just happened. After that scene went viral, a university contacted us. They want to start a program for young filmmakers about emotional intelligence and respect on set. They want to name it the Flame Project." Sandra felt her heart warm. "That's beautiful," she said. "They should invite Keanu to speak." The director laughed. "I already did." He agreed, "but only if you join him." A few days later, they arrived at the university auditorium. Hundreds of students filled the hall, waiting eagerly. Cameras flashed, but Keanu seemed at peace, walking slowly, greeting people with genuine smiles. Sandra noticed how he never tried to stand in the spotlight. He always made space for others to shine beside him. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped to the podium and looked at the crowd. "A few weeks ago," she began, "I forgot my lines in front of hundreds of people. I felt lost, humiliated, and scared. But one gentle gesture changed everything. It wasn't a grand speech or a big act. It was a quiet reminder that respect heals faster than any word of advice." The students listened in silence. She continued, "In a world that celebrates loud success, remember this: kindness is still the most powerful voice, and you don't have to shout for people to hear it." When Keanu spoke next, his tone was calm but steady. "We often believe strength means control. But real strength is how gently we hold others when they're breaking. Respect doesn't need noise. It needs attention." The hall erupted in applause. Many students had tears in their eyes. One young woman raised her hand and asked, "What do you both do when people don't understand your silence?" Keanu smiled slightly. "We keep being kind anyway," he said, "because understanding is not always instant. Sometimes it's a seed that grows later." After the event ended, the students gathered around them, eager to take pictures. Sandra noticed a young girl holding a candle she had made from recycled glass. The girl said, "This is for you both. I called it the Flame of Hope." Sandra took the candle gently. "It's perfect," she said, smiling. You just reminded me that kindness spreads faster than fame." As they left the university, Keanu and Sandra walked together in the soft evening light. The campus bell rang behind them, echoing across the courtyard. Sandra looked at him and said, "You know, I think Mia would be proud." He looked ahead and replied softly, "She'd say we finally understood her lesson." That night, a photograph from the event began circulating online. It showed Keanu and Sandra standing beside the student's candle, both smiling quietly. The caption read, "Kindness doesn't need words to be heard." Within days, people around the world began lighting small candles in their homes, offices, and classrooms, posting pictures with the hashtag #JustFlameOfRespect. None of them knew where it started, but all of them felt what it meant. And for the first time in years, Sandra slept peacefully, knowing that her mistake had turned into something far greater than a scene. It had become a movement of light. A week passed, and the world was still talking about the flame of respect. The movement had spread faster than anyone imagined. Schools, studios, and even hospitals were lighting small candles as symbols of empathy and patience. Sandra and Keanu tried to stay quiet about it, but they couldn't ignore what was happening. Every time she opened her phone, Sandra saw more stories. Strangers helping each other, artists forgiving rivals, people rediscovering kindness in everyday life. Yet not everyone was pleased. A large media company wanted to turn the flame of respect into a marketing campaign. They contacted Sandra's manager and offered a huge sum to use her image and recreate the viral scene. She refused immediately. "It wasn't about fame," she said firmly. "It was about feeling." But the rumors spread fast. News outlets began twisting the story, claiming that the kindness movement was just a publicity stunt. Keanu heard the same talk on his way to the studio. Reporters followed him with microphones, asking if he had planned everything to promote the movie. He stayed calm but silent, as always. One journalist shouted, "So it was all fake, wasn't it?" Keanu stopped walking, looked at the man, and replied softly, "You can fake applause, but not sincerity." Then he walked away. That evening, Sandra sat in her car in the studio parking lot, staring at the dark sky. She felt tired. The beauty of that simple moment was being turned into noise. When Keanu knocked on her window, she rolled it down and sighed. "They're trying to ruin something pure," she whispered. "They're turning light into business." He leaned slightly and said, "The world often sells what it doesn't understand. But truth doesn't fade. It waits." She nodded, trying to believe his calmness. Then, unexpectedly, her phone buzzed with a message from the same film student who had given them the recycled candle. It read, "People are fighting online over the movement. Can you both say something to stop the negativity?" Sandra felt a wave of sadness. "We started this through silence," she said softly. "Maybe it's time to speak again." The next day, the studio arranged a live interview. Cameras surrounded them, bright lights reflecting in their eyes. The host began by asking, "Is the flame of respect real, or was it just a staged moment?" Sandra looked at Keanu, then faced the camera. "It was real," she said. "Not because it was filmed, but because it came from a place of pain and patience. I forgot my lines that day, but I learned something greater. I learned that kindness is not weakness. It's the courage to stay gentle when the world grows hard." The room went silent. Keanu added, "The candle wasn't a symbol we planned. It was a memory, a promise, and a prayer. We all forget our lines sometimes. What matters is who reminds us to find them again." The interview went viral within hours. Comments flooded in from around the world. People thanked them for protecting something genuine. One viewer wrote, "Their silence taught louder than any speech." Another said, "True respect doesn't fade under pressure." The next morning, Sandra received an email from a hospital nurse. She wrote, "We light a candle in our ward every night now. It reminds us to treat every patient with dignity, even when we're tired. Your story changed our days." Sandra read the message aloud to Keanu, her voice trembling. He smiled softly. "That's the real audience," he said. "The ones who feel, not just watch." But just as things began to calm, life threw one last test. During a major scene on set, a sudden technical accident caused the lights to explode, sending sparks across the floor. Panic spread. Someone shouted, "Fire!" Everyone ran for safety. Sandra froze for a second, unable to move. Keanu rushed toward the danger, helping crew members out, his calm voice guiding everyone. Smoke filled the air. Alarms rang, and chaos surrounded them. Sandra coughed, covering her face, when she saw the same small candle from their earlier scenes lying on the ground, still unlit amid the smoke. Instinctively, she grabbed it and ran after Keanu. Together, they helped the last crew member reach the exit before the sprinklers finally went off. Outside, drenched and shaking, everyone gathered under the rain. Nobody was hurt, but the fear had left them silent. Sandra looked at Keanu, his face streaked with water and ash. She whispered, "You always move toward the fire," he replied quietly, only to remind it that light belongs to peace, not destruction. A few minutes later, the director came running out, holding the same candle Sandra had dropped near the door. Somehow, despite the chaos, it had remained dry. He looked at it in disbelief and said, "It didn't break, not a single crack." The crew surrounded them, exhausted but safe. Someone began clapping slowly, then everyone joined in. No one spoke, but the emotion in their eyes said enough. They had just witnessed another moment of quiet bravery and respect. That night, as Sandra sat beside Keanu under the rain-soaked canopy outside the studio, she said softly, "Maybe that's what this flame was meant for, to survive the storm." He looked up at the faint glow of city lights and said, "Yes, because real light doesn't fear the dark." The next day, the sky above the studio cleared after a long night of rain. The fire had caused delays, but no one cared about schedules anymore. Everyone was simply grateful. When Sandra arrived, she noticed candles placed all around the entrance, hundreds of them, lit by crew members in quiet gratitude. Someone had written a small note near the door that said, "For those who remind us to stay kind even in fear." She walked inside and found Keanu already there, helping a technician fix a burnt cable. His hands were steady, his eyes focused. There was no trace of exhaustion in him, only calm purpose. When he saw her, he smiled gently. "You're early," he said. She looked at the candles and replied softly, "It felt wrong to let them burn alone." The director gathered everyone for a short meeting. He spoke with emotion. "What happened yesterday reminded us what this film really stands for. Not fame, not perfection, but humanity. You both didn't just save people, you reminded us of who we are." Everyone clapped quietly, their faces filled with respect. Keanu simply nodded, humble as always. Sandra looked at him and thought of everything that had happened. The forgotten lines, the candle, the kindness, the movement. What began as a moment of weakness had turned into something far greater. That afternoon, filming resumed. The new scene was simple, a close-up of Sandra holding a candle while speaking a single line about hope. The set was silent. The director whispered, "Action." She looked into the soft flame and said slowly, "Sometimes we fall so others can show us how to rise." Her voice carried calm strength. When the director called cut, the crew stood still, eyes glistening. They knew this was the final piece. Afterward, the studio decided to end the movie with a dedication. On the final frame, a single sentence would appear, "To everyone who found light through kindness." A week later, the film premiered in a quiet theater. The audience watched in silence, completely drawn in. When the candle scene arrived, many wiped their eyes. By the end, people stood and applauded, not for fame, but for feeling. Reporters waited outside, hoping for interviews, but Sandra and Keanu didn't stop for cameras. Instead, they slipped away through a side exit and walked to a nearby park. The night was calm and the air smelled of rain. They sat on a bench under a streetlight. Sandra turned to him and said softly, "Do you realize what you did? You changed how people see kindness." He shook his head gently. "I didn't change anything. People always had that light. I just reminded them where to look." For a while, they sat in silence, watching a group of children play nearby. One of them held a small candle inside a glass jar. She told her friends, "My mom said this is the flame of respect." Keanu and Sandra exchanged a quiet smile. A few months later, the Flame of Respect Foundation was officially launched, dedicated to supporting young artists and film workers facing emotional challenges. Its symbol was a simple candle, glowing softly against a dark background. Neither Keanu nor Sandra allowed their names on it. It existed for the people who believed that gentleness was still strength. Years passed, but the story never faded. Interviews, documentaries, and even schools taught about the day when silence spoke louder than applause. Every time Sandra was asked about that moment, she said the same words. It wasn't a scene. It was life reminding me that kindness is the purest art. And Keanu, whenever someone mentioned it, would only smile and say, "She found her light." That's all that mattered. One evening, long after the world had moved on, Sandra received a small package with no name. Inside was a new candle, its glass etched with a single line, "For every heart that remembered to stay gentle." She knew instantly who had sent it. She placed it on her windowsill, lit it, and watched the flame dance softly in the night breeze. Its glow reflected in her eyes, steady and alive. She whispered, "Thank you, Keanu. Thank you for reminding the world that respect is love in its quietest form." As the candle burned, the city lights shimmered outside. Somewhere across the city, another window glowed with the same warm flame. Two souls, connected not by fame or fortune, but by one unforgettable truth, that kindness, when shared in silence, becomes eternal.